In these troubled and confused times, when you were told that your ancestors had no role in determining your ethnic group, where we are told that there is only one way of understanding human existence, where meaning is irrelevant as there is no such thing as free will, where you are convinced that it is okay to simply give away your ancestral homeland, at a time when the Irish people, indeed most across Western nations, are in real danger of falling into the black hole of history, where the people simply no longer exist, it might fare us well to understand a little bit about ourselves, so that we can decide, each person to their own, if there is anything we would like to save in ourselves, where we can have a greater understanding of what could be lost in these coming generations. It is my attempt to bring to light some ways of thinking that are close to being submerged, perhaps for good. To do this, I'll be exploring some of the works, thoughts and tales which our Irish ancestors have left for their posterity, for us. Before beginning this study, where meaning will be lifted from these ancient thoughts, I will be speaking out of the common bubble of reality, the common perception that there is simply one primary way of understanding a thing. Instead, I will speak about a myriad of lenses which can be used to build on a singular interpretation of history, mythology and society. These are useful, as the more information and knowledge a person has about any endeavour, the better that person will be able to make clearer decisions. When one is attempting to reach into the minds of those who have gone before, we find ourselves invariably playing the role of detective without the ability to interview any witnesses. Lacking the opportunity to sit and speak with them, we may benefit from what they have left us across the ages. This is why writing is so valued. These are the direct words chosen and given, by the writer at least. But we've more than just writing. As much as we lionize it, we also have oral traditions of a people. We have their festivals, their folklore, their architecture and their sculptures and art. Like many rooms in a mansion, each one telling us something about the owners. Human interest and curiosity, which has killed more than cats, has birthed different avenues that you may take toward understanding the world and the mind of man. Different coloured lens glasses, through which the world presents itself to us, is different. These different lenses, if you will, have led to the categorization of different fields of study. With each lens, we may explore the mansion without ever having to meet the owner. Much as an artist who decides she will only paint the goats on a cliff, it doesn't mean that she is ignorant or not interested in the rest of the world. It just means she is following or allowing herself to be drawn toward a fascination, an interest, and her will, the dedicated act of painting something, is aligned with an inner recurring passion. People are naturally like this, but we've been born into a time that cares little for difference. In fact, it tends to view difference as something to be erased. Different people, different interests, different thinkers, different fields of study. We simply would not have these if people did not explore their own peculiar and different interests. A child grows and learns well when they are encouraged to explore and try many different things. That is how they find themselves. Otherwise, people just become the same grey blob of single vision. Difference, human nature, has a blindfold put on it, or a single lens. The Cyclops is born. One of these fields of interest, a perspective if you will, is evolutionary psychology, which is the study of behaviour, thought and feeling as viewed through the lens of evolutionary biology. Evolutionary biology leads us to the metaphysical system of Darwinism, which has been rather dominant over the last century at least. Evolutionary psychology is a synthesis of developments in several different fields, including ethology, cognitive psychology, evolutionary biology, anthropology, and social psychology. Evolutionary biology is the subfield of biology that studies the evolutionary processes, which are natural selection, common descent, and speciation, that produce the diversity of life on Earth. It is in this field that we come across what is one of the most amplified worldviews of the last few decades, if not centuries, which is Darwinian metaphysics. So what are fundamental beliefs in Darwinian metaphysics, or in Darwinism? So we've 1. All organisms now alive on Earth trace back to a common ancestor. We've 2. Natural selection has been an important cause of the similarities and differences that exist in the Earth's biota. The name is perhaps common to most, but let us bring to mind how the world is coloured through this lens. The evolutionary mechanism of Darwinian evolution is composed of three processes, primary processes. Number one, natural selection. Natural selection is the differential survival and reproduction of individuals due to differences in their phenotype. It is a key mechanism of evolution, the change in the heritable characteristics of a population over generations. Charles Darwin popularized the term natural selection, contrasting it with artificial selection, which is intentional, whereas natural selection is not. Number two, common descent. Common descent is a concept in evolutionary biology applicable when one species is the ancestor of two or more species later in time. According to modern evolutionary biology, all living beings could be descendants of a unique ancestor, commonly referred to as the last universal common ancestor. So you'll see the words that are used, right? So you could, may, all that sort of stuff. Whenever you see those questioning words or hypothetical words, know that you're dealing with a theory, okay? So it's something that has not been proven as fact, which allows for wiggle room, and it also allows for the opening of windows and doors of different lands, right? We can walk different paths, we can explore things from different angles, right? So we're moving away from the idea that there's a rock solid concretized worldview, and we're allowing ourselves to explore different perspectives of things. And number three, speciation. So speciation is the evolutionary process by which populations evolve to become distinct species. This process is said to be driven by the following. Allopatric speciation is a mode of speciation that occurs when biological populations become geographically isolated from each other to an extent that prevents or interferes with gene flow. Various geographic changes can arise, such as the movement of continents and the formation of mountains, islands, bodies of water or glaciers. Human activities such as agriculture or developments can also change the distribution of species populations. These factors can substantially alter a region's geography, resulting in the separation of a species population into isolated subpopulations. The vicariant populations then undergo genetic changes as they become subjected to different selective pressures, experience genetic drift, and accumulate different mutations in the separated population's gene pools. That's from Wikipedia. And Wikipedia is good because it kind of gives the common understanding of things, right? It doesn't mean it's true, it just tends to give an understanding of an issue that most people would be in line with. That would be their default understanding of whatever topic it is, right? Then we have peripatric speciation, and this is a mode of speciation in which a new species is formed from an isolated peripheral population. So the links of the chains are falling, right? They're expanding and growing. In parapatric speciation, two subpopulations of a species evolve reproductive isolation from one another while continuing to exchange genes. In evolutionary biology, sympatric speciation is the evolution of a new species from a surviving ancestral species, while both continue to inhabit the same geographic region. Perhaps a popular example of the allopatric speciation is in the work of Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs and Steel, where the force of change is down to the environment or geography of different peoples. Diamond touches on why the dominant powers of the last 500 years have been West European rather than East Asian, especially Chinese. The Asian areas in which big civilizations arose had geographical features conducive to the formation of large, stable, isolated empires, which faced no external pressure to change, which led to stagnation. Europe's many natural barriers allowed the development of competing nation-states. Such competition forced the European nations to encourage innovation and avoid technological stagnation. Again, these are just some words on each of these topics, again from Wikipedia. With that being said, let us resist the urge to wholly agree or wholly reject these ideas offhand. Let us instead develop the ability to try this lens on and then that lens, and entertain a conversation between these two lenses or these two perspectives, to get the wheels grinding together in the background. The Darwinian metaphysic suggests that there is no purpose or intended meaning behind the unfolding of life, which we call evolution. The change we observe in animals, plants and people can be reduced down to environmental differences, which add selective pressures to those who inhabit the area. These changes happen randomly and by chance. A little bit differently from the Darwinian evolution, where there's no telos or purpose read into it, we have Lamarckism. And this theory does just that. So it's a theory of evolution based on the principle that physical changes in organisms during their lifetime, such as greater development of an organ or a part through increased use, could be transmitted to their offspring. So if you build your muscles and build your anatomy, then your children will inherit that to some degree, right? So that's the principle, that's the idea. Lamarck recognized several ways in which the environment brings about changes in plants and animals, and it is significant to note that his attention was directed more particularly to the adaptive character of the response, which, as Henry Bergson points out, implies the teleological or purposeful nature of the result. So there's a desired end or a desired goal built into evolution, at least according to Lamarck. So following this line of thinking, we stumble onto the more modern work of biology, or epigenetics. So the inheritance of acquired characteristics, changes you make in your life willfully, will impact your descendants. And this leads us to the work of Bruce Lipton and his book, The Biology of Belief, where your belief can alter your DNA, can alter your genes in some way, and those changes stemming from your belief or how you view things can be handed down to your descendants and your followers. We also have the placebo effect, which is exactly what I'm saying there. So your belief around an idea can determine whether, or the efficacy, can determine the efficacy of a treatment, for example. And there's loads of research done on this. And there's a negative connotation or a not real connotation to placebo when someone says, it's just placebo, without really going into it. So a placebo is a fascinating idea that, depending on how you feel or what you believe about a thing, can determine the relationship you have with it and the efficacy of something. So how you feel about yourself is absolutely involved in the creation of tomorrow's version of yourself. So we've briefly looked at two different versions of evolution, or two different strands of evolution. So how life comes to be the way it is, the processes that move things along, right? So if we take the Darwinian perspective and we apply that sociologically, we have what's called social Darwinism. And this is the theory that human groups and races are subject to the same laws of natural selection as Charles Darwin perceived in plants and animals in nature. Let us remember as well that the changes are devoid of meaning or devoid of a purpose, at least according to Darwinism. So the weak were diminished and their cultures delimited, while the strong grew in power and cultural influence over the weak. So this begs a question: are they the fittest because they survived, or did they survive because they are the fittest? What meaning is being given or taken away from the word fittest? Do we mean that those who have adapted sufficiently to thrive in their environment, or are we to mean those who can dominate and overcome others? Whichever be the case, in each we may see the same glorification towards an overcoming, asserting of oneself and his race over an obstacle. What we're talking about here is the energy of the soldier, the general, the conqueror, the king. And this leads us now into the history of combat and war, which is again just one aspect of humanity's history, both between different races and amongst races. So we've conflict, combat and reconciliation. The history pages are soaked in this stuff. Empires rose and fell, but the people remained. The way of looking at the world was changed, largely due to controls that are outside of their domain, right? And what this tends to bring up is a new perspective, or a fresh perspective, or a perspective that's been dusted off recently, right? And that is the perspective of colonialism. So onto colonialism, which is a different perspective that's been shined up over the last number of years and has come to prominence, at least in certain departments of the universities, which is great. And this is what you'd want to see from these industries of learning, which is new ways of thinking or talking about a thing. Marvelous stuff. However, we fall at the first hurdle here. Not so much with the subject matter itself, but with the hierarchical placement of this lens. When we make one way of looking at a thing without genuine consideration of its counters, the pinnacle and summit of man's mind, then we can run into dogmatic preaching, where nothing else is allowed. Evidence of this in a person will be when one cannot accept, even for the purpose of thinking, a perspective that challenges the primacy of their explanation of the world. Or as we say in Ireland, there's no talking to them. This can act as a blockade to serious consideration of how these different facets of existence and their corresponding worldviews stack up and relate to one another. We are left with a door of the house that we are bullied and ridiculed for wanting to enter and open and go beyond. Restrictions on the house relegate us all to having an incomplete understanding and picture of the entire house. And for those who dwell in their singular rooms, they are blocked from ever leaving the house, so they can never get a full perspective of their dwelling place. The natural response to somebody saying, "Don't go in there, you're not allowed to go in there," is, "Well, what are you hiding in there? And why can't I see what is beyond the door?" Again, natural human curiosity for a multifaceted perspective of things. In these instances, which have taken the place of humble exchange of ideas and fierce debate maybe, what is being hidden from sight and deliberation is a counter-view. For example, Gandhi, who attempted to denaturalize Western civilization by showing that the underlying materialism is not normatively justified, and the alleged benefits of colonialism, modern medicine, technology, are actually harmful to the human condition. He also showed, this is from the Britannica as well, .com, he also shows that the colonists fail in their own terms, pointing out that the European colonists claimed to bring civilization, but cemented their rule by engaging in brutal violence. A more modern taking of this theory from Gandhi comes to us in the form of post-colonialist theory. There are many interesting paths we can wander down from these ideas, but to recover from a history of being colonized, do we disregard any and all parts of that system which was imposed on us? Is the act of colonizing such an evil that there is nothing redeemable which can be taken from it? Do we essentially throw the baby out with the bathwater? Do we reject what became and fall back on our own natures now? Can we return to a prior time? This desire to return to a preferred time and state is called psychologically regression. It can be seen as a reaction to reality, a refusal to reckon with what presents itself to us today. Can we truly detach and remove any semblance of the colonizer's nature from ours? There's a historical relationship here. Much as we are not the same after going through a rotten relationship with another person, or a healthy one which ended for some other reason. We may have no love or desire for the person now, but that does not negate the changes we went through as a result of the relationship we had with that person. Again, it's how we relate to that. Seeing a person react to a breakup by wanting to return to how they were before it began is to see somebody struggling with reality. It is not healthy and it is not beneficial. It's perfectly natural and not unusual to have moments of it, but we cannot reside in that realm solely. So essentially, can we learn from what was done to us, what our people experienced and endured? How do we relate to that? A more modern taking of this theory from Gandhi comes to us in the form of post-colonialist theory. And this again is from the Britannica, quote, "Post-colonial theorists and historians have been concerned with investigating the various trajectories of modernity as understood and experienced from a range of philosophical, cultural and historical perspectives. They've been particularly concerned with engaging with the ambiguous legacy of the Enlightenment as expressed in social, political, economic, scientific, legal and cultural thought beyond Europe itself. The legacy is ambiguous according to post-colonial theorists because the Age of Enlightenment was also an age of empire, and the connection between those two historical epochs is more than incidental. So because some elements of it were bad, then all of it kind of needs to be seen as bad as well, right? So a new lens that has been gathering some interest. It's a lens which seeks to evaluate the effect that losing one's colony, land, ways and wars has both on the individual and on the race. It's interesting, and much of the study, as much as the study of the abused child can yield much knowledge, so too with the study of nations. And whilst gathering the knowledge from those fields cannot be disputed, what that knowledge is used to promote and the validity of such endeavour certainly can be. For example, secreted from post-colonialism is the idea of reparations for slavery from the modern person. So because you're of a race whose ancestors done X, you now owe the other person's descendants your stuff or money or an elevation in societal stature or whatever the case is. So there are many examples of this sort of thought which can be seen across academia and the media, but this binding to the victor or the enslaver could be viewed as a maladaptive response, the desire to seek and demand something from those you say persecuted you. Right, you are fundamentally attached to that person because you're putting the expectations of your future into the hands of those you're declaring abused you for whatever period of time. So the core of this revolves around demanding or wanting something from those who've done wrong. It is the equivalent of needing an apology from the person who abused you before you can move on. You would not allow a friend to remain in this sort of frozen thinking. But these are conversations, regardless of how nonsensical the demands may be, that are prevalent in these times and which need to be ironed out, and let the results of honest evaluation invigorate them or bury them. Hopefully people will have seen that there are many avenues which can be trodden depending on which lens one has adopted, and where one lens can hit a wall, the introduction of another lens can offer a tunnel under it. But we must be willing to look at things in a different way. Literature, as with life, can beg for this approach. It's my hope that people can see how a theory of the emergence or of existence of life can bleed into all areas of life. We can see how a random act of environmental pressure on an organism to change, natural selection, can lead to some taking the position that they are preordained as decided by nature to rule over others, social Darwinism, or the thesis. Resulting from this, we find post-colonialism, the study of the after effects of this worldview, antithesis, where attempts are called for and made to seemingly atone for an ancestral wrongdoing. Different races are elevated above native races on their native soils. Speaking of differences between races and calls for equality and equity come to the fore. What we are looking at here is the movement of worldviews, one replacing and struggling against another, with all the resulting fallout that can come from this. One of the most negative aspects of this can be when we believe that only one perspective must reign supreme, instead of taking the gold from each and building our worldview from what is true from all perspectives, or from a variety of perspectives at least. Next, I will begin to explore the mythology of Ireland and attempt to squeeze the juice of belief and understanding from it. But prior to that, and as we will be leaning on literature, we will look at some lenses which are implied when studying it.